I don't like to hear a lot of whining and complaining. I mean, if there's something wrong, of course, we have to know about it, we have to fix it. But we really need that can-do attitude.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Truth Works. I'm Jessica Neal, and Patty McCord is still out. We miss you, Patty. Come back. But I'm so thrilled today because we have this amazing woman. And if you've read her books or seen her talks, I know you were inspired. I know you learned something. And I just think you're one of these people who, Rosabeth, is after sort of, I don't know, I guess we have a kinship because I think you are trying to impact and make work better. And that's what I'm passionate about as well. But we have today Rosabeth Moss Kanter. And many of you probably have heard of her. A professor at Harvard Business School. I'm sure people have heard of that. She has her H hat on for those of you that are listening and not watching. And she's just done so much work around pushing companies around innovation, pushing companies around gender and diversity. The books that she's written, I mean, this book that you wrote, your first book, I think it's your first book, but it was in 1977. You wrote Men and Women of the Corporation.
Wasn't my first.
Was it not? Okay, what was your first book?
It was called Commitment and Community. And,
okay.
And it was later used as a model for corporate culture, but I was looking at other kinds of organizations.
Yes, but I think to have written this book, Men and Women of the Corporation, at the time that you did, that was probably pretty trailblazer move and not something that folks were really talking a lot about. So I want to dig into that. But you've also written many other books that just challenge the way that companies think and organizations work. And so I just want to unpack it all. Rosabeth, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for correcting you, which is what one should never do as a guest to the host.
Listen, correct me all day long. I thought that was your first book because you look so young, so it had to have been.
Well, that's very flattering, and it's amazing how old that book is. Yet it did, I feel it did open up a way of thinking. And the way of thinking was you don't blame the people who are stuck. You look at the system around them. So right. It was again about corporate culture, about how you build an empowering workplace.
So take me back to that time, because I don't even know, like, at what year women could get credit cards in the United States. Like, didn't you, like, have to have in the 70s, early 70s, have your husband still sign it for you? Or, you know, but you're writing this book in 1977. Was there something that, like, happened, or was there, like, an aha that you had? Was there a story behind what really propelled you to write it?
Well, there was a big wave of writing about feminism and equity and the advancement of women. That had been going on for a while. But a lot of the work was all kind of blame the victim. It had to do with women don't do this well, women fear success, women drop out, you can't count on them. Women don't handle power well. No one wants a woman boss. And I was starting out in my career, and I didn't agree with any of that. I didn't fear success. I wanted to be a good leader of people. I wasn't going to drop out no matter what. So I was very committed. And so I was not working on that specifically, but then I just had to do it. I had to counter those arguments. And at the same time, I was consulting to a major industrial corporation in New York. And I learned about what was then the 3-martini lunch. I didn't drink much because, first of all, I learned that I couldn't function for the rest of the day. I learned about the male environment and the different roles women were cast in. And I got a chance to interview the first women to enter a major technical sales force. And so I learned a lot about being the only, being the first. And I had access to a lot of data. I kept the company anonymous for a lot of reasons. One was that it resembled so many other companies at the time that it was great fun to have people say, well, was this our company? Were you writing about us? Everybody thought it was them. I somehow managed to find those universal experiences of bureaucracy and hierarchy and very homogeneous groups at the top, same ethnicity, all men, and then all these different roles that were played in the company. And so it was great to have an anonymous company, but believe me, a real company. And it really suffered because it did not know how to take advantage of all of the talent of their workforce.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking because as you said that, you know, I've been the only, I've been a first, right? And that wasn't many years ago that I became these things. So since you wrote this book, how much have things changed for us women in the workforce?
What a great question. I mean, partly what happened was that the issue of being the first kept moving up the hierarchy. We still haven't had our first woman president of the United States, but I got to know the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate in her own right, Barbara Mikulski, became a good friend. I mean, we started opening up more and more pathways, and yet there are still circumstances in which I go to meetings and I sometimes look around and said, where are we? But now, and there are some things that have not improved. One is the pay gap. It's improved a little, but not a lot. And I have a lot of hypotheses for why and what else hasn't improved. Companies still don't know how to see talent and not the image of the person first. But that's changed a lot because actually we have a lot of companies that have large numbers of women at the top. And there were some, even during all these years, that were path-breaking. Xerox, which appointed their HR executive as CEO to lead a turnaround, and her successor was a black woman. I mean, very path-breaking. And so it didn't look unusual in Xerox. In my home state of Massachusetts, we have a woman governor, and a woman lieutenant governor, a woman attorney general, and a high proportion of the cabinet is women. And they are incredibly competent and have a lot of support. So that has changed.
Yes. I think things have changed. I mean, obviously there's many more of us at the top. Still need to get more of us at that CEO level. But let's go back to the pay gap for a second, because you said you have some hypotheses on why it hasn't changed. So what are those?
Well, so around the same time that I was doing Men and Women, I wrote a policy book called Work and Family in the United States. And it was partly the family issue, partly. And it's not that women can't balance, but first of all, one of the things that has not changed in all these years is the household division of labor. It's still in women's hands. And I was speaking at a conference sometime years ago, maybe, and it was about, maybe less, but it was about what men can do to advance women's leadership. Well, in my own contrarian way, I thought, God, that's kind of paternalistic. I said, I wanted to say just get out of the way. But of course, there are things that men can do to help. But when asked that question, my answer was the laundry. And that got
the freaking laundry. Please.
Yeah, that
Yes.
got quoted in the New York Times. Sheryl Sandberg quoted it in her book, Lean In. She was an HBS alum, so we talked about it when she came to campus. That was it. If we could do something to provide the support systems, then maybe there would be a set of different choices. And way back then, I talked about flexible work hours. There was a whole movement about flexible work hours. Well, we started to get that with the COVID pandemic. Remote work, choose your own hours, save the commute. I remember writing a blog years ago that said, we could work on traffic congestion, which is a huge problem many places, if everybody just picked their day and one day a week they stayed home. Okay, we can do that. COVID proved it, and yet we're going the other way. And the evidence now is showing that because of that, if you have a choice, a lot of women are saying, childcare, I can't afford it. It doesn't exist. His job pays more. So therefore, I'll stay at home with the kids. That's not always the case. And I love it when I know many instances of the man who takes the flexibility. And in one case of the husband who had a very well-paid tech job, but his wife also was working in investments and he's staying home with the kids. So there are a lot of structural things and personal things that make it hard. And I think if we want better corporate cultures and we want more opportunity, not just for women, but also people who have found it harder to move up, including people from lower income backgrounds, we would work on big system things like transportation. I honestly, in all these years, corporate culture, but I wrote a book on transportation. So important. And childcare. We are one of the few advanced industrial countries that don't invest in great resources for childcare.
Yeah, it's so true. No, I had a gentleman on the show. He's a CEO of an industrial company, and he was trying to figure it out for his company and community. And it's just so hard to figure out. There's no support from really the government at all.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. His employees couldn't afford it. But, even as a company, they were trying to have it be internal, and it, from a insurance perspective, from a cost perspective, it just wasn't possible.
Yes. Well, a number of my women leader friends and I, the Women in Power group, we started certain network organizations, part of national and global, and we talked to one another. And one of them was the CEO of a major retailer. And she modeled a lot. She brought her kids to the office. And, they can sometimes be a nuisance. They can also be a delight. And I think, by the way, a lot of reasons people often want to stay home with their families. Margaret Mead once said it. She said, it's not because babies cry and they need to be taken care of. It's because babies smile and they're such a source of joy and delight. Well, anyway, so that company tried on-site childcare. And that can work to a certain extent, but then we get to the transportation issue. What if people have a 2-hour commute, as they do in some cities?
Right.
So we have to do things on a policy basis, city by city, state by state, but we also have to do it nationally, or we're not going to solve these problems. So I want to say that corporate culture, workplace culture, is a part of it, but so is national policy. And policies have to be family friendly. And that does not mean that you go back to one income, because then we also lose productivity, we lose talent, and a lot of companies now, AI won't replace it all. And a lot of companies now are finding that particularly in high human contact jobs, they're losing people and that they can't replace.
No, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you on the childcare and policy. I mean, there really has to be something done there. And this gentleman, the CEO that I mentioned, he's been trying to do that in his state and in his community, and is just having the toughest time. And tried to get together and ban with the other CEOs from the other companies around town, and none of them would do it, right? And I don't know, it's it's hard, but you look at other countries that have it and it can be solved.
Yes. Yes.
You can do stuff.
It is doable. And
Yeah.
that isn't my current campaign, but I support it greatly. If we're talking about you focus on workplace culture and not just opportunity. Workplace culture is improved if people don't feel stress from their personal lives. Workplaces, in part, companies are greedy. They want to consume all of the person.
Yeah.
And we don't have to go to the other extreme, which, by the way, some of the people who are fans of your podcast might not like my saying, but as somebody who has people work for me and students and so forth, I also don't like to hear all the time about schedules because the birthday party comes first. I mean, yes, take your time off if you need it, but I don't need to hear in excruciating detail that you don't care about the work.
No, it's so true. It's so true.
I believe that we should make the work interesting, enjoyable, and flexible so that people can, in fact, have choices.
Yeah, no, and I think, one of the things that resonated with me about your books and the things that you've been pushing organizations on, it was very much what we did at Netflix. So we hired people under this construct of freedom and responsibility. Right. And that was the foundation that our culture was built on. And, culture to us, I think that word is just used very broadly, but culture to us was our operating model, right? How we got alignment, how we made decisions, who we hired, who we let go. And, when we were hiring, we always sort of set out to say, we want the best people. We want the very best. And we're going to give them all this freedom, but we're also going to give them all this responsibility. And what I've learned over time is if you hire great people and you get out of their way and you empower them to do the work and you trust them to do the work, they do amazing things. And there's just so many companies who I think get stuck in this, and I want to get your thoughts on this, but I've always thought about it as as a company is growing and scaling, they put in these processes and ways of working to de-risk things, right? So we have to have approval for who's going to be able to hire. And so then that becomes 10 people approving, or we have to have an approval process for how much people are going to spend. And then that becomes, I was working with a company where it took them 60 people to sign off on one contractor, which is just but I think when these things are happening, it's well intended, right? But companies are trying to kind of control the chaos.
Right.
And then they start managing to, 1% of things that might happen versus how do you amplify the 99% of people who are going to make the right choices? Right?
Well, it does come down to trust and clarity about the goals you're setting and expecting the results, but not necessarily micromanaging every step of the process. And to go back and give you the other side of what I said about not wanting to hear in detail about people's personal lives, I do feel that people should bring their whole self to work, and that if you trust them, then they can have the flexibility to get the time they need and balance everything and figure out how to get the work done. And yes, this issue of micromanaging at work, it's beginning to be a theme even on a national policy level, that we have too many rules and regulations that are stopping good things from happening. So trust and training. If you don't have really good training and really good information systems, then how can you really trust people? They're not born knowing how to do your accounting job. They have to learn it. And they have to learn your systems. So training is a really big part of it. And that is not, people don't love it. I have to say, a lot of HR processes people don't love. So they have to be people friendly, and they have to all be done not to make sure that people conform, but to make sure people understand the tasks, the goals, the technology, the customers. And training is often very narrow and often very process focused. And I think when people know the whole picture, they're in much better shape to make good decisions for themselves.
Yeah, no, we always thought about it at Netflix as not necessarily training, but context. That, our jobs as leaders and as the company were to give people as much context as possible about the business, about the culture, about their role, about their team, about other teams, about how we operate, how we make decisions. I mean, we over communicated in a way that, when you were doing it, you were like, oh my gosh, this is so much work. But the result was that people were able to move faster. They had the information to make decisions and make calls. They had the trust. They had the empowerment. And, our job was not to micromanage. Our job was to set the context.
Right.
And it really amplified the speed in which we were able to get stuff done.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. In fact, I once did a piece that said everybody in a company has two jobs. One is their own job, and the other is to be assistant CEO. To know what the CEO is preoccupied with, what are the big problems, the big issues, what's happening in the marketplace, and to think about that when they're doing their own job. And also, of course, think about what ideas they can contribute beyond their job. So maybe that's a third job, which is to look around for places you could help out, for things you could do to make a difference that you haven't been asked to do. But in a lot of companies, nobody...
That doesn't happen.
Yeah, people don't care enough. I would say I come from an organization that really tries hard. And at least certain levels, people do look around to say, what needs to be done and how can I help? And when you ask for help, people are very, very responsive. And I attribute that to a couple of things, including an incredible amount of communication. In fact, people are communicated to all the time. We're inundated with cheery emails, ice cream socials, opportunities to connect. That's only in the summer in Boston. But opportunities to connect, meditation classes, therapy dogs. I mean, it's just wonderful that there's so much interest in people's well-being. But that as a context does make people feel they want to contribute. They care about what's happening. And with my Harvard hat on right now, Harvard has been in the news recently. We care about the fate of Harvard, and that tends to be from, as I look around campus, pretty universal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the culture, right?
Yeah.
That they've built. Yeah. Yeah, it's like the DNA now. Because I think if you're really intentional like that, it becomes pervasive and it becomes a behavior that's really hard to not have, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't go away because everybody's doing it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's also a culture a positive culture spreads. And we have to work very hard to spread positivity because negativity is so powerful. And there are studies that show it takes 5 positives to overcome 1 negative. And so I personally look for people who are cheerful and positive. I don't like to hear a lot of whining and complaining. I mean, if there's something wrong, of course, we have to know about it and we have to fix it. But we really need that can-do attitude. And
yes.
I can make a difference. I can take action. And that action will contribute and somebody will notice. And maybe even if they don't notice, I feel energized by action. And when I did my book, Confidence, I learned that when people felt empowered, absenteeism went down because they had the energy and would sometimes come into work on days when otherwise they might have said, well, I'm a little low. I'm not feeling that great. I'll stay out of work.
Well, I was just thinking about what you said because I don't like the whining and complaining either. I like action, and I like, when people would come to me and say, we got a problem with blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Why are you bringing it to me? Like, go do something about it. You have the empowerment to do it. If you see a problem, go attack it. If you don't know how, ask a question. I'll help you. But I think that there's a lot of employees out there that, and I do think the environment has something to do with it, but there are people who are less motivated than others and who are happy to kind of sit on the sidelines. Those people didn't last long on my team.
Yeah, well, those people might not have made it at Netflix. And
they didn't.
They won't make it at, fast-moving, high-powered organizations. But there's room for them too. And it's amazing that when you provide the opportunity, in all my books, I've written about that too. When you provide the opportunity and something catches, because that was something that the person was really interested in, but no one had asked them all these years or nothing had triggered it, that suddenly even the people who seem to be sitting on the sidelines can jump in. And so the more you find out what people are really interested in, this is now for the leaders of teams. It's really, now we go back to outside of work. So what are people really interested in? What do they go home and really want to do? And it might be the kids, it might be sports, it might be a hobby, it might be entertainment. I was very struck by when a large tech company worried about motivation because so many people were not coming into the office. They were a big pioneer in remote work a while ago. And so in order to gather people and build a unified culture where people would want to contribute, they started having events where they showed off people's talents. You could bring in, we're doing that at Harvard too. You can bring in your artwork. You can bring in a music video. You can entertain. And there was a company I had worked with, I think it was a Brazilian company, very interested in diversity, but realized that diversity was not just a matter of race or gender or ethnicity. It was a matter of interest. And so they also did talent shows once a month, and they discovered people who played in amateur orchestras. And people discovered so much about each other and also felt they could express it at work.
Yeah, I love that. Those are great examples. Do a talent show. It's a great advice. Let's talk about innovation for a little bit, because you've spent a lot of your research digging into innovation and why it kind of stalls out in companies. Talk to us a little bit about that. What have you found?
Well, I wrote in my book, The Change Masters, a chapter on rules for stifling innovation. And those 10 rules got copied and got used by a lot of companies in training, but they didn't necessarily stop them. One of the things that interferes is hierarchy, the idea that you know the best at the top. Well, we now live in a world where people at the top don't actually know more necessarily. They may know the key customers' first names, but they don't know about a lot of new developments. And so one thing important is for people at the top to acknowledge that they still have things to learn and invite new generation people in to teach them. And also to be on task forces and project teams that come up with totally new ideas and to be open to that. The worst thing you can do for innovation, I used to joke about this. I'd be asked by a company, come and tell us about innovation. Then they would say, okay, we want to hear about innovation. We just don't want to be the first. So that's one killer. You have to be willing to risk novelty.
Yeah.
The other was they would say, we want more innovation. Who else is doing it? Same thing. They want the safety of knowing that you're not the first and that it's been tried and true, tried before. When that happens, of course, you're no longer innovative. You're just following the crowd.
Well, you're copying, That's what gets me so frustrated sometimes with companies, is that they are looking for another example from another company who did it. Like, if Google did it, we'll do it. If Facebook did it, we'll do it. I still can't call them Meta for some reason. It just comes off Facebook. But anywho, if Microsoft did it, it worked for them, then we can do it. No. These businesses, some of them just don't think uniquely about their businesses. And there's a safety aspect for sure. And I think where I've seen a lot of businesses, I guess, not make that next S curve is that the thing that made them kind of profitable successful in the first place, it's too risky to jeopardize any of that.
So
right? So they're like holding on to that thing, and then they're like, oh, this other new stuff, we can't do that, it's too risky.
Well, there's actually, though, some truth to that, which is that your major customers sometimes don't want change, and they'll hold you back because for them, they already have the contracts, the routines, they understand it. So you have to overcome a lot of inertia, not just in your company, but your customers, the users, and you have to be sure whatever you do is user friendly. Because everybody hates change. Everybody hates it. Change is a pain in the neck. Change is a threat because somebody else is making me do it. It's only an opportunity when I'm empowered and I get to do my project. So companies do cling to their past practices because they're profitable and they don't want to alienate people. It's very hard. It's why some companies do set up new venture units or special teams that get to work on crazy things. Great. However, if that's also a dilemma. Because if they're too separated from everybody else, then nobody will listen to their results.
Right. No, I know. I've seen that happen and not be that successful. Right. Well, in some of your research and work with companies, who have you seen be able to do this, even though it's so incredibly hard?
So, change is hard. And again, we live such complicated lives and things get embedded in structures and rules and routines. And it's sometimes hard to depart from that. Great leaders make the connections for people that help them take steps. And there's a lot of ways to overcome resistance to change. I'm thinking of recycling my list of 10 reasons and making it 12 or 15 reasons to resist change because there are new reasons all the time. Uncertainty is frightening. And we're living in a time of a lot of uncertainty. So luckily, though, there are, especially in America, but also in other places, Sweden, for example, other countries where there are enough entrepreneurs, enough people willing to step into something different. They need a basic sense of security to do that their life won't fall apart if they fail. Yeah. But still, I always thought that every company has a lot of entrepreneurs in their midst, and that was the change masters. They just need to be found, empowered, rewarded, and sometimes they don't stay. Like, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had the idea for Apple when they were working at HP Labs. Who didn't really want to hear about their personal computer ideas, so they left. And the rest is history. And in the history of innovation, no company lasts forever doing exactly the same thing. They just don't.
Yeah, that's true. So helpful. I want to kind of, because we're running out of time and I could keep you all day, but I don't want to keep you all day. I want to kind of dive into a little bit about, you talk about this concept of looking across all your talent and knowing how to utilize them. Talk to us a little bit about that. Like how should leaders think about that? How should CEOs think about that?
Well, first of all, CEOs and other top leaders should think about it themselves. Don't outsource it to HR.
Yeah.
HR has unfortunately become the keeper of process. And, the idea that there's a talent pool and we inventory the talent pool. Instead, I think it should be a cascade modeled by the people at the top, by how they treat the people they work with and that report to them and the opportunities they give them, and then have them continue the cascade for their teams. I think it's operational leaders. It's not HR, and they're the ones who should do it. And there's a CEO I'm very fond of who also starts with his top management in asking them to look at things differently. And I don't know if he's still doing it, but for a while he was asking everybody on the top team to do one thing every week they had never done before, whether it was travel somewhere, whether it was read something, an experience, and they could talk about it, but it was like a mindset. So I think it does start with the CEO. And there are, I don't want to trash, great HR officers. I'm sure you were one.
I think I was.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. But this part of it, the management of culture and talent, shouldn't be outsourced. It should be managed by the line managers themselves, and they should learn to be adept at it, and they should be measured on their talent management skills.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the reason why I think I was able to be a great, CHRO is that I worked in a company where that was true with our founder and CEO. Like he very much set up from the get-go that talent was the most important thing that we did. Our people were the most important. Leaders very much emulated everything that he did. And he would, he had, Reed had had a couple companies before Netflix that, he didn't do these things at. And so I think it was lucky for us that he'd had that experience. So when he came in, he was like, no, this is actually the most important thing we do. And so it really gave me agency to go up and do the things that I needed to do. But in my consulting and advising, every founder, CEO, leader that I talked to, I'm like, if you're not doing it, nobody else is. And they're not going to listen to your HR leader. They're just not.
Yeah.
And so, if it's not important to you, it just can't be she or he's the only one it's important for, right? Because it'll never be a thing. So I'm so glad that you said that. And there are many, many great HR leaders, in the world today. But there are many companies where even if you are a great HR leader, you can't really do much work because that top layer isn't invested in doing the work.
In some companies, big companies, HR reported to finance and administration. Yeah. And that tells you a lot. And when we had movements for empowerment that involved the culture, like the quality movement in the United States, total quality, that was often not given to HR, even though it was culture and people.
Right.
So I think culture and people are too important to delegate.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so glad you said that. We always, we're going to jump into career confession in a second, but before we do, I always ask my guests to leave a nugget of the best advice they can give our listeners. Most of our listeners are people in work, they're leaders, they're CEOs, they're founders, they're CHROs. So what's the best advice you can give them today?
Well, I have many pieces of advice, but one is one that I particularly like is Kanter's Law. I clearly gave it that name. Kanter's Law says that everything can look like a failure in the middle. So don't give up. Don't assume that your first pass at something is always going to work. There's lots of reasons if you're trying to do something innovative, something new and different. There's a lot of reasons why things will start slipping in the middle. And so you have to obviously review, revisit, sometimes reboot, sometimes pivot, but don't give up. And one of the ways that you can support yourself and load it for success from the beginning is that you have a great vision. You have an important vision. You're doing something important. You believe in it, and you're able to convince other people to believe in it. You have allies and partners, and those people won't let you give up. So you go back and say, is it still a grand idea? Is support growing? And if so, keep going. And I would say that's great advice for our personal lives too.
Couldn't agree more. I got little goosebumps as you were saying that. Thank you. That was great. Okay, so we're going to jump into career confession. I'll set it up with some context. So here's the context. My company talks a lot about innovation and inclusion, but the same people still make the decisions. When I speak up, I feel invisible, and I'm losing confidence that my contributions matter. What's one thing I can do tomorrow to rebuild my confidence and actually be heard in an environment that feels stacked against me?
Oh dear. That's a big one. And
That is a big one.
Try to answer quickly, I would say take initiative where you can, even if it seems not related to the big things you're working on. For example, any person at any level in a company, unless they're chained to the factory floor or a warehouse, anybody can start a book club. And invite other people, say over lunch, to come discuss it, and invite some of the top leaders too. That is, create informal occasions where people can learn and talk together, and you make new connections, and you never know what comes out of it.
I like that. That's really great. I think, one thing I would say too is when I've felt not heard. Well, I'll give this example, and I might have talked about it on the show before, but when I was first promoted to be CHRO at Netflix, it was my first big meeting with the C-level team. And of course, I wanted to make a great impression because, here I am. You anointed me to be in this role, and I'm going to prove why you did that. It was me and all men. Right. And they had been working together for a long time, and we were at dinner, and I was trying to contribute, and they just weren't hearing me. Right. And I would jump in, and they would just keep talking and ignore what I was saying. And so then I don't know, I gave up in that conversation. I just was like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to drink my wine. And I sat back and I drank my wine, but then I got in the car and I was on my way home and I started crying. And because I just felt like the weight of me like giving up in that situation, I was letting every woman in the company down. I was letting myself down, my parents down, my husband down, and I just felt terrible. I also felt terrible that they weren't hearing me, right? And I had to try so hard. But after that, I said, okay, if they think I should be here, then I'm going to go in the room with the confidence of that. And I am going to make sure that even if they're talking over me, that they hear me. And so I made like a commitment to myself that in every meeting, I'm going to say something important and they're going to listen to me. And in the next meeting, the same kind of thing was happening. And I just said, hey, time out. I'm saying something, and they listened, right? So I think one of the things that this person can think about is, it goes back to like, don't give up, that advice that you gave, like, don't give up and keep trying and don't lose your confidence.
So, that's both a sad story and it has a happy ending. Thank you for the happy ending. But let me make another suggestion, especially if the whole room seems to be homogeneous. And I've done the same thing, by the way. Sometimes I will talk in meetings just so there's a female voice.
Right.
But here's another thing. Don't let it be a whole group and you. Get to know people one-on-one and check in with them. Check in with them before the meeting. Find out what they're really interested in working on. And when you can, bring something to them. You might have a connection. You might have an idea. So you can't look at a monolithic group. You need to make relationships one-on-one. And people are very receptive to that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I had that with them, because I'd worked with them forever. But that's great advice. Rosabeth, I don't know, you were good for my soul today. My cup is full. I really just thank you so much. And thank you for all the work that you've done. And I was just thrilled to have you as a guest. So thank you.
Jessica, thank you. And you lead a great conversation. And I loved hearing about your career also.
Okay, so thank you.
Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Yes, I will keep trying. I'm not going to give up.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks.